Lovely. So got that up over there. Okay. As usual, we're just going to wait for the room to fill up a little bit. We are excitingly partway through making a little intro cartoon, which will be very exciting, so that you don't have to just listen to me waffle while we wait for people to turn up. So we've got 8 people here. Say hello. Feel free to chat to us in the chat box. And we will do introductions in a minute. Because that little countdown thing is very useful, but it's very short. I just feel like we need a little bit longer. Oh, lovely. So hello, Laurel. Hello, Beverly. Hello, Victoria. Doing our usual, just hanging out for a bit. Hello, Ellie. Just autistic people being awkward. Oh, lovely. 18.
Oh, amazing.
Hey, Alice. Lots of lovely people to say hi to. Yeah, definitely need our intro scene.
You haven't planned out like some sort of interpretive dance yet for this bit.
No. Hello, Robert. A lovely new sort of modmin for Academy behind the scenes is very, very up on tech. So I was saying about how frustrated I was that the cartoon software that I have doesn't have a shaved-headed woman in a dress. So they've gone off to find and source somebody to make the cartoon character for me, and then they're going to use it in the software. So that'll be very exciting.
I love that. I love that.
So we'll do some quick introductions then. Hello, everybody in the comment section. I am Dr. Chloe Farahar of Academy, and I'm joined today by, and I didn't check, Erin Ekins or Ekins?
Ekins. It's a weird
Ekins.
one. I'm not the Pokemon. I am Ekins.
Nice. And my co-educator and co-presenter, David Gray-Hammond.
Hello.
Hello.
Anybody in the comment section, are you new to Academy? Do I need to explain who we are? I think by this point, we all know each other quite well. So if anyone wants to tell us if they want some explanation about who we are and why you're seeing us on your screen. And today, our topic is Queerly Autistic, the ultimate guide for LGBTQIA+ teens, which Erin and I have already had a nice long conversation, and David has got some questions, I think, as well. And we're going to kind of run through our typical questions. So if it's okay, I'm going to do my typical first thing that we always love to ask autistic people who come on, which is, who are you and what is or are your dedicated interests?
So I'm Erin, as has been said. I'm a queer and autistic woman, and my dedicated special interests are kind of that intersection between gender and sexuality and autism. Also things like Doctor Who as well, but the relevance to dedicated special interests are, I'm really kind of fascinated about that overlap, living up kind of under that kind of intersection as well. So yes. And I'm also a writer. Sorry, I'm a writer and a blogger. I'm trying to be a YouTuber, but it's not going well. It's a very busy schedule. And I work in charity as well. So do a bit of everything.
Fantastic. And Sai, our Northern Autie, is in the comment section actually pinning things for us. So can you see that, Erin? So we've got from
I can.
Ellie,
Yes.
that they've actually got the book. So yes, that's basically kind of what we're going to talk about, and the purpose and the reason why it was needed, and so on. Our typical next question then is, when were you discovered autistic?
I was, in terms of professional diagnosis, I was 23, but I'd been pursuing it for about 2 years before that. So I was about 21. And my friend told me that they were autistic, and left me to stew with that, because they were hoping that I would go, hang on a minute, we're very similar. So I was 23 when I got my diagnosis, but from about 21 I've been sort of understanding myself as autistic.
Fantastic. And David, have you also got the questions in front of you?
I do, yes.
So feel free. So we've just done the when were you discovered autistic?
Yes. So what's your book called and when's it out?
So my book, I have a copy. I'm going to do my kind of telesales thing. There we go. So it's called Queerly Autistic, the ultimate guide for LGBTQIA plus teens on the spectrum. And it was out on the 21st of April, so it's been out a couple of weeks, and it is available in all your dedicated book buying places, and there is an audiobook version that should be available on audiobook platforms, including Audible. So if you'd rather hear my dulcet tones rather than read my words, that's fine.
I have to say, I wish such a book had existed when I was a teenager, you know, certainly as an asexual person, but you know, what can we expect from it? What's it about? I mean, obviously it's about being queer and autistic, but
yeah, my goal was to, there are some kind of personal anecdotes in there that come from my own experience, because I felt like it was important to say I've been here, or I've done this, or this is what happened to me. But its main focus is on being a guide for young people, for young autistic people who know or think that they're LGBTQIA plus in some way, and to act sort of as like a primer into things like figuring out your gender and your sexuality, and finding a place for yourself out in the queer community, and you know, and things like how to be safe in relationships, and you know, what to do when you're faced with bigotry. So it was sort of, I wanted to create the guide, like as you said, that would have been really helpful for me as a teenager. So that was my main goal, and I wanted it to be kind of talking about those things that are quite complicated. For example, when I was younger, like you read books about kind of sexuality, and it just presumes that you know what attraction feels like, and I'm sort of sitting here going, I can't work out if what I'm feeling is attraction or not. So I wanted to kind of get right down into talking about, what does it feel like to be attracted to someone, romantically or physically or both, or you know, and but also do it in a way that was kind of quite plain spoken and accessible. I didn't want it to be like an academic text that wasn't necessarily accessible to a large number of people. I wanted to put it in terms that would have helped me as a 15-year-old. So that's kind of the main bones of it. It goes from looking at what different identities are, and you know, the history of different terms and why people use them, through to figuring it out, different ways to figure it out, coming out to your friends and family, you know, finding friendships and relationships. We have a chapter on kind of that talks about safe sex and looking after yourself, and consent. And you know, all the way through to, as I said, you know, if you want to get involved in activism, I've got some kind of stuff around getting involved in activism and dealing with bullying online and things like that. So I tried to fill it with the stuff that I would have needed.
And so why, and this is obviously me playing devil's advocate because I know why, but why is it needed in terms of that? Why does it have to be about autistic queer people, and realising and what have you? So why is that important? Why did you write about that?
I think for starters, it's my experience kind of being like coming into the queer community when I went to university was that I expected it to be like coming home, and it's like, these are my people, and it was closer to that, but I was very like, oh, okay, I'm still feeling kind of the same isolation I felt, because it was still a very kind of neurotypical community scene. And kind of now looking back and reading kind of books to research my book, everything that was sort of targeted at kind of neurotypical people. And I was thinking, okay, but I need a little bit more than that. I need to know if a gay bar is going to be loud. I need to know if I can't handle like crowded spaces, where can I go to connect with the community? I need to know what do you mean when you say, don't just assume that I know what it feels like to be attracted to someone, So it very much kind of came from that space of the guidance that we have already, which is, there isn't as much kind of sex and relationship education out there for people anyway, but I mean, everything is sort of targeted towards neurotypicals, which is a big disadvantage for us, because so many of us are in some way not straight or, not cisgender, and there's just not that information out there. And I wanted to do it in a way that was accessible for as many people as possible. I didn't want to exclude anyone by making it like big and, academic. And that was really important to me, because I feel like if you make something kind of as accessible as possible, it doesn't just help kind of neurodivergent or disabled people, but it also kind of, it makes it easier for neurotypical kids to access as well, so that they might be able to access it in a way that they can't other things. So yeah, it was that there's so many of us and there's such a crossover that is just not addressed in the resources that we have for queer kids, queer and trans kids. And I wanted to kind of, that space was empty and it needed to be filled.
And I think when we had the conversation before to sort of prepare for this, you touched on or spoke about the problem is that when you are looking at research or literature or anything around this, around the intersectionality of that, there are a larger proportion of queer people who are autistic than there would be non-autistic. So you were looking and you're seeing a lot of, well, why is that? As opposed to, well, but okay, you want to look into why, kind of doesn't change the fact that they exist. So you wanted to look at more about, well, how do we actually support those people?
Yeah,
with that intersectionality.
Yeah, it was incredibly infuriating looking at some of it, because there was, you said, the huge focus on, okay, but why are autistic people more likely to be kind of some flavour of queer or trans? Why is this happening? And I'm sort of sitting there like, it doesn't matter why it's happening. It matters that we exist, and why isn't as much energy being kind of funneled into support and resources and kind of help for us to kind of live the best lives that we deserve to live. It was a very kind of blinkered area where all I could find was people talking about why, and I was like, I kind of got to a point where I was like, I don't care why. That doesn't materially impact me at all. So I wanted to kind of get past the why and get into like, just right, we exist, this is the state of things, fantastic, moving on. How do we support people?
I think before we move on to the next bit, can you actually touch on why? Like, okay, that's what the literature's looked at a lot, and there will be still people who want to get to the why.
Yeah.
Although me personally, I'm still at that point of like, I'm not as interested in that as I am in what are the practical things we can do for those people with that intersectionality. But there will be people who want to know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, that's still really important. I think, but I think it is kind of also tied into that, because people have been for years and years and years researching, why are people gay? Why are people trans? And it's always that there's never that answer that is just like, finally we have the answer. There's kind of lots of theories, and I think this is where this kind of question sits. I don't know if we'll ever fundamentally know, but a lot of the as that comment just said, the idea of non-societal conformity is a big one. There's a quote by Wen Lawson that I really like, and when he talked about how we already don't adhere to, or even kind of often don't understand kind of those societal norms and boxes and expectations that kind of restrict a lot of other people. So we're maybe more likely to embrace that or work it out if we're kind of not normal. I hate that word, but there we go. Normal in that way. And I think that's there's probably a lot of kind of truth in that, obviously. Of course, some of the research that I looked at tried to argue that the reason why a lot of autistic men identify as as not straight was because they were just scared of women, which was a really lovely thing. I was like, this did in the bin. So that's not the reason. I don't.
See, personally, I've and I think it's touching on what we've just been talking about. I've never really understood why people ask why. It's like no one goes like, well, why are you straight? Why are you neurotypical? It's we only ask why about things that aren't the mainstream, and that's never made sense to me. And I don't know, perhaps that's part of the reason. Perhaps that plays a role in why autistic people are more likely to identify with these labels, because we're not caught up in that. We don't really care if we're in the mainstream.
I also think kind of people coming into kind of the autistic community, I think because there's so much kind of gender and sexuality diversity in the autistic community that a lot of people are very open about, that maybe kind of that, autistic people that are coming into that community are seeing a lot of, are seeing all these things and going, hang on a minute, that really resonates with me. I'd never thought about that before. That feels, I really like that. That identity makes me feel, that feels like me. And, it's, I think because there is that diversity in the autistic community, I think maybe that is also, because it's something that's kind of being openly discussed in our spaces anyway, not in the spaces that necessarily are talking about us, but the spaces that we're actually in. And I think there's, having that diversity already there probably helps a lot of people, autistic people, actually figure that stuff out and try labels and things. So I think it's, as you said, it's one of those sort of questions that I think there'll be a lot of theories about, but not necessarily any. I don't think there'll ever be kind of we won't find that magic. I mean, we've not found the gay gene yet, have we?
No.
So we've got a prompt here. I wasn't part of the conversation, so I'm not entirely sure how to word this, but it says practical advice / tools on accommodating autistic LGBTQIA plus people.
Yeah.
So the book, what kind of practical tools does it provide?
Yeah, no, so it kind of gives like advice and options on things that might be useful. So in the figuring it out sections, I have a figuring out section for gender and then a separate one for sexuality. Although there is quite a lot of overlap, I wanted those chapters to kind of stand on their own. So for example, one of the ones in my figuring it out chapter, I say, if you're using fan fiction as a tool to explore your identity, don't let anybody tell you that that's not valid, because that's how I figured it out. And a lot of neurodivergent people that I know I met in fandom spaces, and fandom was also a really good place for them to kind of figure this stuff out, whether it was to do with their gender or to do with their sexuality. So that's kind of a big one that I talk about quite a lot, just because it's quite personal to me, and kind of different ways that you can, asking yourself questions like, why do I connect with this character so much, and why am I writing this, and is it for a reason? Is it just because I like it, or am I exploring things? So that was kind of one I had kind of as a tool that is available for people to use. But other things, just like I've done an out and about section, which is about going out and funnily enough, going out and about in the queer community. And it's things like saying, if you go to a big inner city pride, it's probably going to be really loud. But if you go to like a smaller town pride, for example, my local pride in a town in Essex is actually a lot smaller, and it is still loud, but it's a lot quieter because it's just a lot more local rather than a big event.
Well, I live in Brighton, so I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's like the thing of, I'd love to go to London Pride. Would I? I don't think I could handle it. So, and it just, things like that, and talking about, hey, this is what a gay bar is. If you struggle with these sensory issues, it might be an issue. So here's some advice on what to do. Things like having a buddy when you go out, and having a script for, I need to go home, practicing those sorts of things, figuring out where the bathroom is so you can lock yourself in a cubicle if you need to for a bit. And then all the way down to, like, if you want something a bit quieter, saying, things like, if you live in a university town, the university in that town may have an LGBT plus association or society, and it's likely that they will do things like host quizzes and film nights, because I know mine did at university. So if you're looking for a way to connect with the community, that might be useful if you live in a university town, but without you having to kind of go out into the clubbing scene. And also there are, information on, safety tips for those sorts of interactions, and, how to stay safe when you go out. But particularly if you're finding your community on the internet, like I did, how to stay safe on the internet, because I don't want to be one of those people that's like, the internet is big and bad and scary and you shouldn't go on it, and everyone's not who they say they are, and because so many of my friends, without whom I'm not sure I would be here today, I've met on forums and in fandom spaces, and some of them I've been friends with for nearly 15 years. But at the same time, it's about embracing that side of kind of the internet, but then also staying like safe, and kind of tips on red flags to look for. So yeah, I mean, it's those were the kind of things that weren't in other resources for like LGBTQIA plus spaces. They didn't tend to say, by the way, this type of gay bar might be a bit louder than this type of gay bar, because it's not something that they were thinking about. Whereas for me, that's a big issue, because I've been to a gay club once in my life and I ended up crying in a corner, which doesn't make one feel very connected to one's community.
And I need to look into it a bit more about, are there any decent resources on autistic people learning about dating and relationships in general? Because obviously not to tar all of our autistic community with the same brush, but we can be relatively naive. Like I was both knowledgeable and naive as like a 16, 17, 18-year-old.
Same.
So I imagine some of the guidance that you have in that book could also apply to autistic, cis and straight people. Although I'd argue how straight is such a relative term anymore. But, so yeah, getting into sort of quite dangerous, potentially dangerous situations, or even just learning your boundaries to say, just because you've watched TV and not saying that I thought like this at all, but you've watched shows and that's how relationships work, and you always have a kiss on the first night and things like that. But if you don't want to, it's okay not to. And I think just being allowed and told that that's your boundary and that you can put that in place, I think is actually really, really important.
I think so many kids are brought up sort of being made to believe that the boundaries they want to have in place are not acceptable boundaries, and I think that's really something powerful in this book, is teaching people that it's okay to have boundaries.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a whole section in the book on consent, because I felt like that was so important, because I was like, no, we need to nail what this means, and when is it not consent, because it's not just, like I was saying there, it's not just a no. That's, that is not the end be all and end all of consent. It's not just a no or a yes. And I go into things like how to communicate with your partner if there's that you're not happy with something, either kind of in life or even kind of in the bedroom. Like if you're not enjoying something but you can't verbalize it, here's some tips as to, if you need like a tap me 3 times on the shoulder and I'll know there's something you don't like but you're struggling to verbalize it. It's something that I have in the book. And I think also something that I really wanted to cover in the book was the idea that it's not just your traditional relationships that can be abusive. When I was at university, I didn't even know that I might be autistic, but I knew I was queer. And I was so desperate for connection in that community that I actually found myself in a relatively, not physically, but very emotionally and mentally abusive friendship. It was never anything beyond a friendship, but it was still abusive to the extent that there are certain text message tones that I can't hear to this day without having a panic attack, because that was the tone I had when they would message me. But it took me until my mid-20s to recognise that, hang on a minute, that was an abusive relationship. It was a friendship, but it was also an abusive relationship, because any kind of relationship like that can be abusive. And I was so desperate to be accepted in this community and have friends in the community. And I had so few friends. And as you say, there was an element of naivety there as well. Like I was like very much sort of, oh, but this person cares a lot about me. That's why they want to be my only friend. Oh, I've never had a friend that loves me so much. And, so that was something I wanted to put in the book as well, was to say, even if it's not like a romantic or sexual relationship, you can still be the victim of abuse in a friendship or that kind of relationship. I don't
know if you'd be interested in having a longer discussion on another session about that, because that comes up quite a lot for us as autistic people, which is, like you say, not even necessarily romantic relationships, but we're just not always able to tell that actually this isn't what I want, this isn't actually good for me, and that person isn't actually a good person for me in my life. And I can think of a couple of friendships that really crossed some important boundaries of mine that I tried to put in place, and I'm getting better with boundaries. But that's why I always have hammered home since having a really good discussion with an autistic counsellor who's a friend, because she is everything is about boundaries with her, and I can completely understand that now. It literally every element of your life, not just necessarily friendships or romantic relationships, boundaries are huge, and we're actually not very good at knowing our needs. So what is it that I need? Who am I as an autistic person? And then, okay, I know my needs now. That means I can then assertively say, this is my boundary, you've crossed it. And since those sorts of things, I think that is really, really huge for us.
And I think it's also kind of the more marginalization you add in. So if some, as you say, if you're autistic and you're queer or you're trans, that's a whole other level of kind of isolation, and that, and feeling like you're separate to the rest of the world. And, it came from, I did have some quite toxic friendships in school, but this one went to that level because I was a queer teenager, and I was desperate to have queer friends because I was desperate to be accepted in that community in a way that I hadn't been at school and at home, which I think then made me more vulnerable. And I really just didn't know where the boundaries were between actually this, you're not being treated very well. And also I think an element of not, internalizing it and going, because they were very good at saying, well, I said that to you because you were you were mean to me, or you were really annoying, and how do you expect me to react to that? And I was so ready to accept that actually, yeah, I was really annoying, so it was kind of my fault. And I think that's something that particularly autistic people are, you know, and as that the comment from Ellie says, we're kind of raised not to have boundaries. We're sort of, I think particularly as autistic people, we're sort of raised to be like, this thing that's comfortable for you, but that's not normal. So you will go outside of this and do things you don't want to do because that's what normal people do. So we've almost kind of got it trained into us, particularly when it comes to kind of pleasing other people and internalizing that it must have been, you know, when you've always been the annoying kid at school, it's really easy to be able to internalize people justifying the way they treat you, because you do think, I am a very annoying person, it's no wonder nobody likes me, I'm lucky to have this person who will be my friend. Yeah.
And that's such a frustrating one as well, because it's obviously just not a good enough excuse. Somebody could be as annoying, the most annoying person, but if there's no malice or anything behind that, it's just really not a good enough excuse to be cruel to somebody.
No, not at all. I mean, I'm quite openly and proudly annoying these days. I'll go, yeah, I'm annoying. That's fine. The people who like me can handle the level of annoying that I am. You know, I've got a solid friendship group that aren't actually local to me. We mainly interact online, but who know all my annoyances and quirks. And it's taken me till being nearly 30 to get to that stage. But, you know, I'm very happy in where my friendships and things are at the moment. Would I like my friends to be slightly more local? Yes, particularly kind of the last year has been really, really difficult. But at the same time, the friends that I have are the right friends. And, you know, that's been really empowering to kind of to have that, because I didn't have that for a really long time. And yes, I've just seen the comment that says we're raised to apologize. Oh my goodness. Sorry is the word that comes out of my mouth more than any other, I think.
But then it makes me think of how literal I can be, because I remember I was 15. Was I 15 or 16? Whenever Y2K, so
yeah,
year 2000, I was like 15 or 16, and I was at the boyfriend that I had at the time. We were at his like parents' New Year's Eve party, and very, very drunk. I have no idea who they were. They were an uncle or somebody or other. And I apologized because I was in their way or something like that. And they told me, you shouldn't apologize. It's a sign of weakness. And I took that so literally that even now, when I apologize, I won't use the word sorry. I will apologize because I know maybe I've made a mistake or I've upset someone, but I'll usually won't use the word sorry because I took it so literally. Yeah. I'm also thinking about things that can be relatively, quite, again, just thinking about being autistic and relationships, and particularly when you are young and a naive, like say 14, 15-year-old or what have you. And one of the sort of very, very first proper kiss that I had with a boy, and, he was the same age as me. So like I say, we were about 14 or 15, and he was very, very much pressuring me at that age to do much more. And I believed him as well when he told me he was a virgin, because he was trying to, make me feel that I was special and all this kind of thing. Luckily, I put my foot down because I was very uncomfortable, but I still believed him. And I think some of that as well, that we might be less prone to realizing we're being lied to, because for not all of us, obviously, again, some autistic people are potentially very good liars, and what have you.
Very good at recognizing liars,
yeah. But I am still really, really terrible at recognizing, even if somebody's, being deadpan and telling a joke, I still can't pick up on it. So, that can really put us in quite, again, a vulnerable place. So I definitely think your book, would have still been useful back then.
Yeah, I think it's something that, as I say, we don't get. I think particularly when you have a diagnosis as a child and as a teenager, I think there is more of an inclination in kind of parents and carers and guardians to shield you more from that information when actually you probably need it more. I remember getting a huge amount of backlash when I would talk about how, you're an autistic teenager who's trying to figure out their sexuality is probably watching porn of some sort, and you need to, but the amount of kind of, they were like, why are you encouraging my child to watch porn? And I was like, oh, I'm not encouraging your child to watch porn. I'm saying they're already watching it. And you need to talk about it, and you need to have a conversation about that. And, you need to, but there was just this real reticence to have this conversation. And
that's a very British thing, though, sadly.
Yeah. But I also think things like it's related to the infantilization and desexualization of disabled people in general, but kind of particularly sort of autistic and other neurodivergent people. I seem to remember, that when that book came out was a couple of years ago, was it To Siri with Love? It was a travesty of a book. And a mum writing about her teenage autistic son. And I remember there being a line in the book around, like, if any woman ever slept with her son, she would view that woman as a paedophile, because she saw her son as a perpetual child who could never be a sexual being, and that anyone who ever did sleep with him would be abusing him. And that was just kind of this, I was like, that's why I think, because I feel like there's even more, obviously, as you say, there's a very British reluctance to talk about these things anyway. Sex in general, but even more so if it's queer, and even more so if it's queer and the person they're talking to is autistic. It's like all of that. Nope, that's not happening. They're a perpetual child. It doesn't happen. Put down those blinkers.
And it always
makes us really vulnerable. It makes us so vulnerable.
It makes you more vulnerable. Knowledge really does empower people, and I think it's frustrating that, like I say, not all, but a lot of parents in the UK just won't have those conversations with their children, regardless of their neurology or whether they're disabled or not. And it always makes me think of quite a few years back, Davina McCall, dependent on where people are in the world and how old they are, they might not know who I'm talking about. But Davina McCall did like a documentary thing about sex education and how terrible it is in the UK. And she took some teachers and some, I think they're again around 14, 15-year-olds out to, or where was it? Amsterdam, somewhere like that. And they sat in on a sex education lesson with the children there. And they were showing all sorts of things about, how do you actually please the woman? Here's that special button. We're not going to go into details, but, this kind of thing. And actually explaining that stuff, not just these really abstract pictures and diagrams of, fallopian tubes and what have you. And, really explaining it to them, because they'd been taught since very small about love and connection. So they didn't teach them about the birds and the bees when they were 5, but they started very early on teaching them about you can love someone, what might that mean? So by the time they got to 14, 15, it wasn't this weird, laughable taboo thing. So all these, like I think it was Amsterdam, children are watching the film that they, educational film, just, okay, yep. All the British, including the teachers, absolutely mortified, embarrassed, and they would just, Davina looked at the statistics and the differences between early pregnancy, teen pregnancy, and, in Amsterdam, if it was Amsterdam, it was much lower. Actually, the age that they actually lost their virginities was much higher, because they'd made a more informed decision about when and who to have sex with for the first time. Whereas it's very much stumbling around in the dark and kind of making lots of ill-informed decisions, if at all, if they're decisions.
Yes. Yeah. No, completely. And I think when you add like the, autistic side of it to that, I remember when I was first starting out in the book, one of the things I said, I was like, I'm going to have a sex chat. I tweeted out sort of what were some things that would have been useful to know. And like one of the main ones that came back to me, and a few people said it, and it kind of stuck with me, and I've included it in the book, was people saying things like, nobody tells you that lube could be tingly. And I didn't like it, and it made me very stressed out because I wasn't expecting it to tingle. And I'm like, that's such a kind of, that could be so important, and is so important, and it's just not something that's talked about. Do you know what I mean? It's you know, and this was something that a lot of autistic people had experienced, and I've got that. I'm like, check that your loop's not tingly if you don't like that in my book. And you know, it's things like that, but we don't have those discussions. I mean, we don't have them in any circumstances, but I think even less so we have them with, as I say, kind of, or we don't have them talking about, you know, queerness. Definitely. I was very much taught when I was, you know, had sex and relationship education. I was very much taught, you know, this is a man and a woman, and they do the thing and don't get pregnant. That was, I think everyone else in my year had the putting a condom on a cucumber thing, but my teacher got too embarrassed, so we never did that. Which is...
And do you think, yeah, so that you know, British prudishness, you know, means that you've not been taught that skill. Thanks
Exactly.
for that, Sorry. I've just seen the banana in the comment section.
And but, you know, it's really important.
And Samara's point, which they're saying, I kind of wish they'd have taught about the act itself. Yeah, because like I say, it's very bizarre. It's very abstract. It's completely removed from the idea of love and romance as well. Like, why are we separating it in that way too? Like I say, it was a very interesting, like I said, the documentary that I saw.
Yeah.
Samara also just in the banana. So and Samara had also said, what was it? We took my children when they were around 12 or 13 to a sex ed class for autistic teens. The parents were in a separate group as well, mostly taught about consent and anatomy. I mean, yeah, I mean, at least that's better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah.
But and then Samara's next comment was the one about, I wish they'd actually also taught about the act itself.
Yeah.
So we, you know, I mean, that's still something.
Yeah.
They also need broader teaching about different sexual orientations, though, because I know for me, being ace, you know, I'm 31 and I only just publicly came out as asexual this year, and that's because I didn't even know asexual was a thing until I entered the autistic community, and I was hearing people saying, well, not all autistic people are asexual, and I went, hey, I should read up on this, and I read up on this and I went, oh, I'm not broken, I'm asexual. Like, but for 30 years, I thought there was just something very wrong with me, because no one at school said, yeah, being asexual is a thing. Like, you know, I learned a bit about, you know, homosexuality, a bit about bisexuality. My school even loosely touched on trans issues, which was impressive for a Church of England school in the early 2000s. But you know, no one ever told me that asexual was a thing. And so it was only like 2-3 years ago that I found out it was a thing. And you know, I've gone my whole life going like, why am I like this?
Yeah.
And if someone had just told me it was a thing at school, I might not have spent so many years just really mixed up in my head.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something really important there, which is, you know, the idea that not all autistic people are ace. And sometimes kind of we go too far in the other direction in the way we talk about things. And we try and say, like, you know, actually, you know, we try and combat the desexualization and infantilization by being like, no, all autistic people are sexual beings and have sex and like sex. And it's like, well, no, because there's a lot of autistic people are asexual, but being asexual is different from being desexualized. And you know, I think I've spoken to I think in kind of the wider disabled community, I've spoken to people who were reticent about coming out as asexual because they worried that they were reinforcing the stereotype of disabled people as sexless. And I think that's something that's all tied in with how messed up the way we kind of view these things is, because it's you know.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the asexual front, even in the autistic community, being asexual is wildly misunderstood because, you know, I did a live stream with Harry Thompson a few months back about this, you know, where we were talking about the fact that actually asexual people can have sex lives.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and this is all stuff that I wish I had learned years ago,
Yeah.
but there's just, you know, and this is one of the reasons why I say I'm glad there is a book now, you know, because I think learning about, you know, all these different experiences and stuff, it's so valuable, especially when you're younger, because especially when you're a teenager, it's an age where if no one's telling you that it's a normal thing to feel, you just assume you're broken.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is, you know, as you said, and I try and, when I talk about asexuality in the book, I try and be like, asexuality is not the same as celibate. And, you know, some people who are asexual actually really like sex. They have kind of sexual feelings, but they don't have sexual attraction. They're just not, they don't feel that sexual attraction. Or, you know, I talked about kind of the way that people, you know, might be, you know, you can have sexual feelings but not want to have sex, and it's all like, as you say, it's such a spectrum. And it's not something that and I wanted to be really clear on that in the book, and I also wanted to be really clear in the book that you can be flexible with these things, and you can say, oh, I like the sound of that label, that might apply to me, let me identify with that for a little bit and see if that works, and then if that doesn't work, you can move on to something else, and that's fine, and you're not betraying anybody. And you know that there's no right or wrong way of doing this. It's so kind of, and that's something that I really wanted to get across, was that labels and identities are supposed to be empowering, and not restrictive. Like, they're not boxes, they're kind of like flourishes of paint that, you know, they're not kind of things that hold us in, they're things that we use to express ourselves. And I think that's really important.
They kind of flow fluidly from one to the next, don't they? There's no brick wall separating them off. Not
at all. And that's something that I see a lot I do worry about with kids who are kind of maybe more involved in online discourse, because I think that there is in some areas of online discourse quite a big kind of, well, you can't say that because you're that specific identity, and then you're in here, so you can't cross over into this identity. And I'm just like, not how it works. No. And I think that can be really unhealthy. And I want kids to feel like they are both free to kind of explore these different identities and these different feelings, but that they also have enough knowledge to be able to be safe doing it. Like, if someone thinks, I think I'm gay, but I don't want to have sex, you don't have to have sex to figure out that you're gay. And, you know, you don't have to have sex with at least one man and at least one woman and then go, yes, I am bi now. You know, that's not how it works. I think that was a big thing for the book, that I really just I wanted kids to feel like they could figure this stuff out, and that there was no wrong way for them to do it, and that it's such a spectrum.
And I think that understanding of it as, like you say, a true fluid spectrum, because I was actually having this conversation with Si earlier on when we were working out, you know, putting the description up for today and things like that. And we kind of had a discussion about how in the old days, in quotation marks, so what I mean is in like the late 90s, early noughties, when I was a teen, it was just LGB, right? And we're talking, you know, so some people now would be like, well, usually a certain majority voice, usually cis, usually white, usually male, and so on, will complain that it's ridiculous how long, you know, LGBTQIA plus and so on, and complain about that. But what David said, and kind of what you're basically talking about, is actually, no, it's just being more, it's allowing for more freedom for people to actually find or figure out who they are without feeling broken. Yeah. Because like David said, before realizing there is such a thing as being a grey asexual, for instance, and things like that, actually, that's not just adding extra letters and nonsense to a long list. It's actually allowing people to go, okay, I get this, I understand myself, there's nothing wrong with me, and I can actually connect with other people based on this shared experience of sexuality or gender and so on. And it also makes me think of my friend Annette. So she's openly queer woman, describes herself as a queer woman who's bisexual. She's 49, and because we spend so much time with young autistic people, because we support university students, so we're talking about people who are investigating and working out their gender, their sexuality, and so on. And she's almost kind of sort of disappointed or sad that she'd never heard the term non-binary when she was younger, because she feels that she probably would have, and is feeling now at 49, that she connects with that more than this idea of being a woman, or, you know, this kind of thing. And so it is, okay, maybe that's more of the history, and it just took time for all these different ways of experiencing the world to come to light, as it were. But yeah, so you're at least offering that now to young people to work out, or older people. You know, I know it says teens on your book, but surely there's going to be advice there for any autistic.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've had some of my friends who are, I think she's going to love me for this if she ever sees it. My oldest friend, who I sent it to, was in her mid-40s, and they were like my first editors. And she came back, she was like, "I learned so much," and I was like, "Yes, we won." You know, so it's, yeah. I mean, I'm hoping that because I've like aimed at and tried to make it accessible for autistic people, I think it's that there's potentially that ripple effect that comes with accessibility, which is if you make something accessible, it actually makes it better for everybody. And that it will be something that people can, you know, that people can refer to kind of at any age, and whether they're autistic or not. And that's been, and I'd love if parents or carers or guardians can, you know, pick it up and have a look. So I think that would be really helpful, because I mean, more than anything, your kids need your understanding and support, and also your, you know, they need to be empowered with knowledge by you. And I think that's really, and not to be afraid to say things. Just seen a comment, actually, I'm just reading it, sorry.
I'm actually thinking, can we come back to that one? I'd quite like if we could grab this person's first. We'll come back to some.
I was about to say that.
Yeah, I saw there was a couple, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think particularly because, like you just said, actually, regardless of whether they're autistic, the book might actually be quite useful for parents to read, to learn how to have those conversations, or learn. Is that fair to say the book would allow parents to be empowered to have those conversations?
And I think it gives you, I wanted to be able to give people the language to talk about it as well. So, for example, there's a definition of bisexual, and the history of bisexual, and how it's used by people nowadays, and kind of the understanding of what it means, because the history of bisexual is really interesting, and it was, and you know, I think a lot of people see it as two, but actually kind of like 30 or 40 years ago, it was sort of agreed in the community that it was more of a attracted to one or more genders. So there's a whole kind of reclaiming of language, and it's just really interesting. So I've got some of that in the book, because I'm a bit of a nerd about that. So I was like, I'm going to put some of that in there. But I think the most important thing is, I think having an understanding of what that means. I think it's also really important to not be dismissive in any way. You know, if your child identifies as something on Saturday, and then on Monday they come in and they're identifying as something else, don't brush that aside, because they're trying stuff on, and you know, and I think everything needs to be sort of validated. And if they're, you know, I think that's just really important to treat it in a way that's not kind of just, oh, you identified as this last week though, and now you're this, so you're, you know, even if it is trying stuff on and then going, oh, I don't think I identify that way. It's important that they played around in the sandbox a little bit. And you know, I think we get, you know, I think a lot of parents maybe get worried about that, and it's like, don't be like, oh, this is just a phase. But if it turns out that it was just a phase, it was a phase that they needed to have.
Like you say, they're just working it out, like any teenager.
Yeah.
Even if we consider just a cis straight teenager, they're still trying to work things out.
Absolutely.
They're trying to, they might be trying all sorts of things or thinking about all sorts of things and trying to work out whether they might like those things or not like those things. Why should that necessarily be any different because the person happens to be queer?
And I think as a parent, you have to appreciate just how nerve-wracking it can be to try on these different identities, because we do not live in a society yet that is fully accepting of these different, identities. So if your child is coming up to you and saying, I think I'm bisexual, or, and then next week saying, oh, actually, no, I think I'm asexual, or, you've got to stick with them through it, because they're going to need you through that, because it is nerve-wracking trying to work out who you are.
It's so fun. And can I just say, I'm so proud of your son at 12 and a half that he's able to have these conversations. I think back to me at 12 and a half, and I'm just like, I'm absolutely in awe of kids and looking at them and thinking, oh, I was, so I just take that. I know it's really weird, me going, never met your son, but I'm very proud of him. And I think it is just sort of just listen and validate, and and do talk, like I know we talked about like porn earlier, but have those conversations around the fact that as you would with any teenager, well, I would hope you would, but I know a lot of people don't. Is to talk about things like, if you're watching porn, please be aware of this, and this isn't real, and this isn't very healthy, and this is, things like that. That's really important. And I try and kind of walk a tightrope in the book of being like, you shouldn't feel ashamed if you're watching pornography, because it is a thing that people do, and you can use it to help figure stuff out, but you need to be aware of all of this baggage that comes with porn. So I think that's a difficult tightrope to walk, but I think having those conversations is really important. But it would be important whether or not the child was cis or straight or queer, or so. I just think just being kind of, as I say, just validating and understanding as possible, and if that involves learning a bit more about an identity that they are expressing, that they feel close to. That can be just having that little bit of background knowledge about it, so it becomes less of a scary thing. It's like being bi isn't like a scary thing that is like, oh no, what's that? I don't have any experience with that. It's just a way of being, and it's has a cool flag.
Is it fair to say? Do you discuss sort of love and? So if they're 12, yes, it might be that you or they would like to have a conversation about the birds and the bees. I'm being so prudish. But it might also just be, is it fair to say they could just have a conversation? Well, what is it you love about both men and women, or boys and girls, because obviously they're 12, to talk about love as well, and what is it as opposed to, why does it, we get kind of worried that it's just about sex as well, I think, which there might be some of that, but there's also maybe they're just really infatuated with a particular person. And
I think and I do talk about in the book as well, I do talk about that the split attraction model, which is not binary, but the idea of romantic attraction and sexual or physical attraction, and how in some people they're very separate, in some people they work together, there's a lot of overlap between them, but that you can talk about it from a romantic perspective as well as kind of a sexual perspective, and how they fit together. And so I personally in my life found talking about the split attraction model really, really helpful. So for example, I've got quite a few labels that I have an affinity with, which is why I use queer most of the time. But I also use bi because I have a history with bi, and also it's a cool flag. But I also have quite a close affinity with demisexual, because, you know, learning that was a bit like a light bulb moment for me, when it was like, you know, I do feel sexual attraction, but only if I feel romantic feelings first, or only if I get to know that person first. And then a lot of people will go, oh, that's just how everybody feels. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is a big moment for me. This doesn't feel like this is just how everybody feels. This feels like a moment of understanding of myself. So yeah, it's as you said, Wendy, it's a huge period of exploration. And, you know, it may be that, you know, your 12-year-old will say, this is how I identify, and that will be how they identify for the rest of their lives. And that's fantastic. Or it may be that they float in between, or they figure it out, or they go, oh, actually I'm gay, or maybe I'm not gay, or, you know, things like that. And I think it's just being as validating and supportive as possible. Your child will want to know that they are listened and that they are being taken seriously when they tell you this stuff. They don't want to feel like they're being fobbed off or mocked or hand waved away, because that's such a terrible feeling, particularly when you're talking about stuff that's like really, you know, really talking about the soul even.
I think not just to try and plug your book, but I think that even if you're in the comment section and you have a young person, or you're thinking about yourself as an autistic person, and actually you in general would just like to know how to have those conversations with an autistic person who may potentially become romantic or want to have sex with whomever that might be, I still maintain that actually that would be a really good thing. Like I say, for me as a 15-year-old, like I say, relatively consider myself to be cis and straight. But again, because of the autisticness, I didn't know I was autistic back then, which is a whole other kettle of fish. Yeah. But, you know, but being autistic, that autisticness will definitely and did impact romantic relationships and things for me. So I think, yeah, if you're in the comment section, you've got a young person, or you're thinking about yourself and actually you'd like to understand sex and romance a bit better, then yeah, I think that's a good plug anyway, but a relevant plug for everyone.
I'd also say, if we're talking about gender as well, because obviously I have more experience personally with sexuality, because I do mostly consider myself cis. I don't ask me about gender, but I did a lot of research and talked to a lot of kind of trans people and non-binary people and you know, and other people who don't identify as cisgender, in order to write the gender sections of the book. So I do have a section on figuring out your gender identity, of kind of, you know, transitioning, trying out pronouns and, you know, new names and things. So that is a hefty kind of chunk of the book. But I will say that kind of just a plug somewhere else is that I know that when Lawson and Yen Perkis have just released, through the same publisher as me actually, the Autistic Trans Guide to Life, which goes through all of that, but it has been written by 2 trans and non-binary authors who are both autistic. And I think that's a huge, amazing resource to now have on the market. So I would absolutely recommend everybody go and check that out as well. I wasn't able to recommend it in my book because we were writing the books at the same time, didn't realise. They're not recommended as a resource in my book because they weren't out. Their book came out a couple of weeks before mine. So I absolutely would go and check them out. When and Yen are marvellous. Ren and Yen are marvelous.
And something I just wanted to bring up quickly, because you know, Chloe talked about, you know, it's worth getting this book if, you know, if you think your child might ever be interested in sex, kind of thing. That's not the exact words you used, but and you know, we're talking about gender diversity. The point I would like to make to any parent watching this is, please don't assume that your child will never be interested in sex or experience gender dysphoria just because they're autistic, because whilst we develop at a different rate, there is every chance that one day they will develop into an adult who, or, you know, not even necessarily an adult, you know, as this book points out, you know, it starts from a young age. You know, and you need to you need to make sure that you're not assuming it's never going to happen, because that's very invalidating.
Yeah, I think always just have as open. I know that we're very, very socialized to think to have, when we have kids, and it's not actually our fault, that, oh, my kid's going to grow up, my daughter's going to grow up and they're going to find a man and get married and have children and have a nice house and, and all of that. And I think we need to sort of, I think from the start really kind of having more open minds, because, I mean, when my mum had me, she didn't think that I would be single at nearly 30 and still living at home and needing some degree of, I can't live independently. I need to. I'm on some areas I'm very independent, but in other ways I'm very at home, and I'm also kind of very queer at home and stuff. So, this wasn't what I don't think my mum ever envisaged for me. So there's that element of kind of having to put that aside. Put that aside and, not get upset when my old schoolmates are going down that path and I'm not. And I think it's really good if we encourage from a really early kind of perspective of just not having that kind of fixed plan in our heads for our kids.
And I think
there's so much more diverse than that.
And I think the three of us are relatively good at demonstrations of that, because you've got David, who's a grey asexual, who's about to get married. You've got me, like I say, I consider myself cis and straight. I'm 37. I have no plans to get married, and I've never wanted children. So I have no plans to have children. And then, like you say, you just described yourself, right? So you can see you could be cis and straight like me and still not end up married with kids, because I'm autistic and just that's who I am as a person. And so it's not just because I'm autistic that I'm not married and don't want children, but there will be some element for me personally that's why.
And I think addressing parents as well, I think it's really interesting, because I know that a lot of I think a lot of women get an autism diagnosis, and yes, congratulations, David.
Yes, thank you. I just saw the
comment. A lot of I know a lot of parents end up getting an autism diagnosis because their child gets one. And I have kind of a similar story, not in terms of an autism diagnosis, but in that your child exploring this stuff could potentially open you up to exploring more of this stuff. I mean, I came out as bi when I can't remember if I was 16 or 17, but you've got, the sort of age. And then when I was 20, my mum came out as gay, and part of the reason, and she was 50 years old, and part of the reason that had kind of gotten her to a point of thinking about that had been me coming out and me being very open about it. And now she's married to my stepmom. So I mean that was nearly 10 years ago. So it's always, I think, whatever age you are, it's really amazing to when I was coming out at 16, I wasn't expecting that to be the catalyst for my mum coming out. So it's, you never know what you might discover about yourself in the process.
And I just want to grab this comment that I've
saw that.
Didn't want to forget. I'll read it for because it's a relatively long comment as well. So the person's asking, is there a chance that we can discuss furries and the sexual connotations? They're not sure that they understand if it's a fetish or a sexual orientation. One of their children is obsessed and they are very naive, and that this person worries about them being catfished. If there's no time, no worries. Oh, okay. No, there is time.
I would just say that I completely understand. I'm not particularly au fait with the furry community. I do know some people who are in the community, and I think it's one of those things that I think there is an element of kind of, as you said, sexual connotations to it. But then there is another level of it, as a lot of the people that I know, it wasn't so much a fetish thing. It was I liked having like another character. I liked having a character that to play, like, and not in kind of a sexual way. So I think it's really difficult, I think, on the internet in general in any of these things, because I mean the internet is a great place but also a terrible hellscape, and I think the best thing to do, I think, with that is whatever it was, whether it's furry stuff or whether whether they're into trains or, you know, Doctor Who or anything. I think the main thing is kind of online safety, and talking to your kids about online safety is really important. And I do have, again, plug, there is a bit in the book, because for me being online was such a huge link to the community, and was where I found my community, and it's where I maintain my community. I consider my kind of queer and autistic community to be in online spaces, particularly during a pandemic. But, you know, I do have a bit on the out and about section, which is around, it looks at different online forums that people can use to connect with the community, but then also goes into detail around, you know, it talks about how to stay safe. And I think bear with me one moment. There was a website that I linked, people to for more, that had some really good advice in terms of staying safe. Let me just see if I can find it. I do have I think it's on, I do have a resources page on my website, which is queerlyautistic.com/resources, where I've got all of the resources that are in this book. I've actually got there as well. So that so they're all kind of clumped together in a kind of an online space. So I don't have it to hand, but I do believe it is on that resources page. So yeah, I think it's definitely something maybe to look into, to kind of understand more about the furry community. I know people who have been furries for years and are very happy. And you know,
and I don't know anywhere near enough, I think, to be not even a novice on any of these topics. But I think it's fair to say that if they're genuine communities, you will, you know, when people think of things like BDSM, and actually it's all around consent, and if it's true, you know, it's not abuse and so on. So you would want to, like you say, investigate those spaces potentially. I don't know how much Tamara would want to do that, but, you know, investigate those online spaces to make sure that there's definitely look into it. And I think look at kind of what kind of, because I mean, as I say, with like furries are, you know, it can be a sexual thing, or it can just be I enjoy playing a character thing, or I enjoy role playing, like in a non-sexual way, like and I think, as with all kind of internet spaces and any space really, there is that harmless, you know, the majority is kind of just harmless, you know, people, but there will be people there in that community for whom it is more sexual. That doesn't make them predators, but then amongst that there may be some predators, because I think every space has predators in it, not to like be, oh, they're everywhere, but, you know, this kind of, you know, I think it's just sort of having the knowledge, that, you know, empowering kids with the knowledge to stay safe online, and also to kind of foster a relationship with your kid where they can talk to you about things and feel validated, because I think that the likelihood of kind of that they will maybe talk to you about a situation that's made them uncomfortable, rather than sort of keeping it to themselves, I think is really important. Yeah, they also commented that they would do anything, but also want to respect boundaries and privacies. I do wonder if there's ways, again, because I'm very, very much a novice in understanding this, but, you know, how embracing would the communities, those different communities, be if a parent went in and just said, I really just want to understand this because I think my young person, you know, they seem to be potentially into this, or that this might be their identity, and I want to understand it and learn more. So I can, which is lovely that as a mum, she's like, I want to respect boundaries and privacy. But I just wonder, what do you think? Would the community be quite, receptive?
I mean, I've not had any bad experiences with the furry community. I've never been in the furry community, but I've been adjacent sometimes. My experience with the furry community has often been just very nice people who just like wearing fursuits. So I think that's I think that could be, you know, really, I think that could be a really good idea. And it's, you know, and showing kind of, and obviously your child might get a bit, oh mom, why are you doing that? But I think as parents, you expect your kids to be embarrassed of you at some point.
With territory, I think, yeah.
I mean, I would personally, I think that's a really good idea. I think, you know, maybe not everybody will respond 100% well, but I think that's the case with any community that you go into asking questions. And yeah, I think kind of just understanding it a bit more. I think, as I say, I don't have a huge amount of understanding of the furry community because it's not something I've ever been in, but I am very deep in fandom communities. So I can see that it's probably quite similar in terms of it becoming your whole life. Because my fandoms kind of are my life, apart from this work. It's like this and my fandoms. But it is that sense of community as well. So I think I've waffled a bit there.
No, it's great.
But yeah, I think just learning a bit more about it. And I think the most important thing, whether your kid is kind of really obsessed with like furries or other a fandom Minecraft or anything, I think kind of online safety is really is the kind of the important thing, and having those relationships and making sure that they know that they can come to you and you won't kind of minimize what they're saying, because it doesn't take much for a kid to feel like they're not being listened to. I know for me it didn't take an awful lot. It could just take my mum going, oh no, I'm busy because I'm stressed with this thing, and I'd be like, oh well, I'll never talk to you about this ever again. You know, so I think that's just but I think that's kind of with anything really.
And I just want to grab this one as well. So yeah. I'm just going to double check as well if, Amanda, you might need to clarify a little bit for me, but I think I'm understanding. So they're saying, can we talk about autistic identity or autistics identity linking the experiences with the queer community? So some don't like to connect the experiences. It makes sense to them. So I know this person, mm-hmm. I know they're, you know, it's not an issue. But they're saying that for some, they might struggle. I guess to some extent, I have actually come across autistic individuals because of that very black and white thinking that we can have, that they do struggle with the idea that it isn't just men and women, and men and women date men and women. And, you know, so I think this might actually, because I was thinking I'm not going to bring in my anecdote, but actually I think it brings in my anecdote, which I discussed with Erin. So if I read it and kind of explain it, then maybe that will help, I think. So it makes me think of this. So with our university sort of students group that we have for autistics, we're very clear in our description that we're open and embracing of LGBTQIA like individuals. And I think that that's led to a good thing, which is that we don't potentially get people who might be combative when it comes to that. And it also allows those individuals to be in a space where they can be both openly autistic and openly queer and safe, which is, you know, what we want and is fantastic. So my note that as well I had is that cis gay males who don't feel comfortable. So we had, so my example was, we had a few cis gay men who didn't feel comfortable in other groups with cis heterosexual white male autistic people. And it was really sad because they thought we were still a female only group, which was what it was before Annette and I took it over. And we were like, no, we understand it's more actually that we're masked autistics. And so we sort of changed it. But they actually felt much more comfortable in our group because it was very queer embracing autistic space. So yeah, and my note was that demonstrates the importance of discussing the intersectionalities together. So I don't know if you read Amanda's question differently to me, or if you've got a thought on that.
I was because I think my brain went into, obviously if we're getting this completely wrong, Amanda, do clarify and go, stop talking. That's not what I meant. I was, but yeah, I just would love to kind of just comment on that story, and that, yeah, I've in that, you know, I think it's important that we have kind of queer embracing autistic spaces, because I think a lot of traditional autistic spaces are very white cis het male focused. So, and that can be that can sometimes be quite a toxic space. And as you said, it's why it's important to have kind of these inclusive spaces, and to talk about it, and to be like, how many autistic people are not connecting with the community, or a community, because the only community they can see like local to them, or that they can see online, is white cis or het autistic men. And the importance of recognizing that homophobia and queerphobia and transphobia and all of those things, and heteronormativity and cisnormativity, are all things that are in the rest of the world, are also there in the autistic community. We are not exempt from those things, and as you know, I've been in autistic spaces where I've been uncomfortable, because it has been very sort of that white male dominated. And yeah, so I don't know if that was kind of like, I don't know if that was the question was about, but I think that's a really important point to raise, and why it's important to talk about and have queer spaces for autistic people, or queer inclusive.
I think it's quite interesting, because I mean, anecdotally, I mean, yes, I've met lots and lots of autistic people in numerous capacities, but I think it's quite interesting, because you see us, and we can, as a community, be relatively very open-minded and embracing of difference. But then if we're not necessarily capable of that ability to be very understanding and embracing of difference, like say, maybe that person is particularly black and white thinking, so it's quite a difficult thing to challenge, or you know, so then it's about, well, it's very unlikely that you might be able to even shift that person's thinking even the tiniest bit. So then it's just, yes, how to make those nice safe spaces then, if we can't make them. Like I said, wouldn't ever name anyone, but we did have a student who really did struggle to even just allow it to just not be a topic of discussion, that you know, that there's no such thing as you know, it's not just men and women, there is non-binary, there's trans people, you know, they really struggle with that. And it just got to a point where it was making a lot of our autistic students very uncomfortable, even the ones
I'm not laughing at you, I'm laughing at the comment that just appeared on the screen.
Yeah, and it even made, you know, the cis and straight autistic members uncomfortable as well, because they were very embracing of our, you know, queer autistic students too. Okay.
Yeah, I think oh, that was what you meant. Okay. Because I was reading it as well as sort of like whether it was asking how do we feel about autistic people who maybe aren't queer or trans, making kind of saying like, talking about kind of the queer community in terms of, you know, likening kind of oppressions and marginalizations, and that's a really difficult topic to go into, because it's the one that I'm not sure where I stand on. So, you know, things like saying, it's like, yeah, that is really difficult, because I always see my queerness as so entangled with my autism. The way I experience gender and sexuality is I experience it autistically. Like, I can't separate them, and figuring that out was really important. And I think that's probably true of most of us. I experience everything autistically. But if it was in terms of like, can say, you know, a straight autistic person say, I identify with gay people because I feel like they've had a similar experience, like because I feel like we've been through the same things. It depends. I would say probably don't do that. Because understandably, you can understand where someone might get upset with you saying that to them. In the same vein that I wouldn't say because I'm autistic that I know what it's like to be I know what it's like to experience racism, because I've experienced anti-autistic ableism, totally different things. And it's, as you say, it's different experiences, and there may be occasionally a level of overlap, but I think it's I think we can talk about them in their own terms without, I try and talk about these things without likening different kind of marginalizations to each other. I think that's probably the best way to go. I don't know.
Whilst we're on the topic, also the other troubling thing I have seen is people in different marginalized groups playing like the trauma Olympics to see who. Like, there are some groups that are clearly experience a greater deal of marginalization, but I think it's about recognizing that each group has its own unique experiences with marginalization.
Yeah, and obviously when we talk about intersectionality as well, so the idea of intersectionality was first put forward by a Black woman academic who used it specifically to talk about the experiences that Black women had as being women and Black, and how their experiences were not that it wasn't just, oh, I experienced sexism and I experienced racism. It was these two work together and create something that's very different. And that was sort of where that came from. And so I think, particularly when we think about our, autistic people of colour in our communities, and how, I mean, there's been stuff happening online recently, and people, so and autistic people of colour that I follow have expressed again, and they've expressed it before, that they don't feel comfortable in the mainstream autistic community, because there is kind of that thing of, I've experienced this because I'm autistic and therefore I understand racism, and it's like, no. And so kind of a white person's experience of being autistic could be very different to a Black person's experience of being autistic.
I did a very brief blog that just got released on Thursday for LSE University about being an autistic academic and the sort of ableism and so on, and what I have to do to stay in that, in academia, what I can't do and so on. But I make it very clear towards the bottom that, yes, while I'm an autistic woman, so yes, being autistic means you're marginalised, being a woman in academia means you're marginalised and so on. But there's absolutely no way that I can know or connect with on a personal level what it feels like to be a Black woman or who's autistic in academia and so on. And so I make that call at the bottom, like, it's really lovely that they invited me to do that talk, to do that blog. But it's kind of like, please amplify these other voices. Because like you say, I think when people, they hear it, it's almost like people will hear, okay, it's a Black woman, so the intersectionality is Black plus woman, like it's 1 + 1 kind of thing, and it's so much more nuanced and complicated, and it's not even Black times woman, it's it's like I say, it's a whole thing in and of itself of how they might experience the world. And
it all comes, it's like what I said about the fact that kind of I'm not queer. I do say I'm queer and autistic, but I like saying I'm queerly autistic or autistically queer, because it's not a 1 + 1 situation. The way that I experience my queerness is I experience it autistically. They don't sit kind of side by side. I do say that kind of, I have a little caveat at the beginning of the book where I say I am writing this from a position of privilege. I am a verbal autistic woman who is white and who has a supportive family, and a lot of people that I know in the community do not have those privileges, and therefore their experiences might be really different, which is why I'm really keen that people use the book, particularly I think on trans issues as well, because I'm not trans. I worked very hard on the trans sections because I wanted them to be as right as possible. But I do make a point of kind of like a caveat in the book that says, you know, please use this book as a springboard to find more lived experience voices, and to, you know, I link to people's in my trans section, I link to kind of trans YouTubers who talk about their experiences, because there's something that they can bring something that I can't, because I'm not talking about it from a position of experience, and to seek out the voices of kind of queer and autistic people of color, because that experience will be very, very different. I talk a little bit in my book about Black Pride, about how, you know, we'd have kind of our mainstream pride, but then there's also in London, we also have Black Pride because of the racism that was kind of endemic in the queer community. So I think it's, we've gone into a whole conversation about intersectionality that, but yeah, I do kind of encourage people to look up, as you said, to really kind of look up and look into. Sorry, my assistant's just got me a drink.
And I try to bring it up as often as it is, what's the word, relevant, because you mentioned, you know, being autistic also affects how you are, or in the way that you might be queer and so on. And so I loved, you know, talking to Nick Walker, and just, she blew my mind by explaining that, like I say, although I consider myself cis and straight, I do queer my gender because I shave my head, and in the, you know, our society, femininity usually means long flowing locks and so on. But because of my neurology, I hate hair. It's very distressing and uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
So I shave it. So I queer my gender by having my neuro-queer brain.
Definitely. And I think that's something with that I say, you know, I shave my head for two reasons. One of them is sensory, like you said, but also kind of sensory goodness, because I like feeling my hair when it's short.
Oh, no, I don't like touching it.
Don't like touching it. Oh, see, I just spend all day doing that.
I'm on team touching it. I love it when it's freshly shaved. I sit there for hours. Probably why I'm going bald.
But I think there's also a level of when I became kind of more comfortable in my queer identity, that I did find it a nice way of kind of queering myself. And, you know, so I like it, and I would have it anyway, I think, but I also like kind of that added queering of gender roles that it brings. And so, I mean, and things like, you know, and I talk about in the book how, like, things like the clothes you wear, how you express your gender, the way you have your hair is not necessarily indicative of who or what your gender is. So you can be a trans woman who dresses very masculine. You don't have to be feminine to be a trans woman. You know, you can, and it's so you can wear a dress and not in any way identify as a woman or feminine or in any way. And I do have in there a table which has, which I actually got quite a bit of inspiration from the trans. What is it? The trans. I think it's like the Trans Survival Guide, but my brain's gone completely. It's by Fox and Al Fisher, and it's a great book, and I'm losing my mind. What was it? Trans Teen Survival Guide, where I actually said, you know, if you are wanting to explore gender through clothes, this is what's traditionally masculine, this is what's traditionally feminine, and this is kind of a little bit of a you know, of kind of a look at that the ambiguity, but also that you could wear everything in the traditionally masculine section and not in any way identify as a man, or you can wear everything in the traditionally feminine section and not identify as a woman. It's just this is what our culture says. So if you want to try it,
and I think that's the thing,
is
it that's where it confuses, I think, you know, very, in quotation marks, cis straight people, in the sense of they're like, no, if you're trans, it means you're literally have to be the binary opposite of what I expect, and so they would be really, you know, their minds would be blown when I would, you know, if I would explain, I know, you know, fantastic trans autistic students who want only top surgery, or only bottom surgery or something along those lines, because it's not your binaries. You're trying to stick us into binaries again. I actually had my note, which and David, if you've got any final sort of real burning questions or anything, but my last point that I had towards the end of our sort of pre-questions and stuff was that there's more queerness and transness, or we talked about this, in the autistic community, and actually there's a lot less, largely speaking anyway, binaries in our community, because we do not like binaries. We get fed up with binaries. We get fed up with high versus low functioning, male versus female autism, which doesn't exist. You know, so maybe it's, we're much more understanding, I guess, that it really isn't binary. There's so much more colour to the world.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've been joined by a puppy, so please. Did you want to come and say hi? Is everyone all right seeing a puppy?
People are excited to see a puppy.
Come here. She's teething at the minute. She's a bit nippy. Let's get my hand out, you mouthy weirdo. Come here. There we go.
Oh,
So small.
You're a good girl. No, you don't.
We got a yes please floof at the as a comment. Yes please floof.
Who's that? That's mine. Hello. She's teething at the minute, so she's very nippy. Don't growl at me.
So what kind of dog are they?
She's a staffy. She's about, I think, 12, 13 weeks. We've had her a couple of weeks. She's a good girl, really. She likes to bite her brother. So hello. This is my distraction. This has been my distraction the last few weeks. Yes. Anyway, continue.
So I don't know, David, if you had any other things? We've covered quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we've really covered everything that I was intending to talk about. You know, that I was intending to bring up. I think. I really think. I mean, I know for sure that I'm going to go out and buy this book now.
Yay!
You know, it'll be a gift to my 15-year-old self. But I think, I do think that any parent or teenager watching this, or even not just parent or teenager, anyone with an interest in this topic, you know, from what I've learned about this book, I think people need to buy this book.
I think just from the conversation, it's quite clear there's going to be lots. Oh, look, there you go. Samara, I've already purchased it. The technology, we have the technology to be able to do this at the same time. I'm going to leave David with our final favourite question. Okay, so this is our big one at the end. What is your favourite stim?
Oh, well, I was aware that this was going to be asked, so I've been thinking about it. And very difficult to know, but I've had to say that my favourite stim is my soft toy stim. So I bought a friend. So there we go. This is a Pikachu. I have a soft toy with me at all times. There was something quite empowering about the first time I gave a talk about being autistic and queer, and I said, I'm going to have a soft toy with me when I do this talk in this auditorium. And there was something really empowering about being able to say, hello, yes, I was 28 at the time, and I was like, and I have a soft toy, and I'm talking about this stuff, and I know what I'm doing. So I have a lot of soft toys, and they're my favourite stim. I get a lot of comfort from them, and I get a lot of joy from them. Always have. So they're my favourites. But I also love a fidget spinner, but soft toys.
I think soft toys are a good one.
Yeah, I always say I'm very professional looking to some extent, depending on like if I'm doing training or something, and I know that predominantly they're not autistic, although I will introduce all different objects towards the end to show them, you know, I am actually sitting here regulating and so on. But from here up, I look very professional. And then in front of me, I've got all my stimmy things. We've got Oggy. So Oggy is goes everywhere. How old's Oggy? 35. That's 35, yeah. So Oggy goes everywhere with Northern Naughty. So yes, toys and soft toys are very, very important.
I've got an infinity cube.
I've got my magnetic rings, and somewhere around here I've got my my little chain thing that rolls around.
Got my little gear stick here. All of these two were both bought from Black Girl Lost Keys, which I recommend supporting. Renee, I really like her. So I've got some more
particularly stuff. A stimmy? Is it like a stim shop?
No, it's she basically does training and consultancy around ADHD. But she has a shop attached to her work where she sells stim toys. She also sells things like bottles of water, like water bottles that have pill pockets in them, so that you have your pills with you with your bottle of water, which is the only way I remember to take some of my medication. But yeah, I reckon Black Girl Lost Keys. Her name's Renee. She has a shop where she sells. I've got some other stimmy bits coming from her as well. So I recommend. We always like to support our neurodivergent siblings.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find a quick link if people are interested. So
she's actually the reason why I think I might be ADHD as well.
Sorry, what was her name again?
Black Girl Lost Keys.
She's particularly awesome. Also sounds like almost like a band.
Yeah. She has a saying which she has on t-shirts and stuff, which is guard your yes with your life, which is about boundaries. What obviously what we were saying earlier around, don't just be giving away your yes, protect it because it's important. So, and that's
I think at some point we will need to have another one on boundaries as well. Yeah. It's just huge. It's so important, and it's so it really is quite life-changing in a non sort of soppy sounding way. Like I say, for many of us who've maybe really struggled with being taken advantage of, or not even that, just not saying no to going to the pub because everyone's going to the pub or something along those lines. The boundaries things is really, really important.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much, and thank you for introducing you. I've actually sat in some of my socials when I'm not doing too well with one of the reversible octopodes.
I have a unicorn version of that.
Yes. And when I'm not doing very well, maybe I'm quite low on spoons, so I'm not really able to talk much, I'll literally sit there with it on my head. And it's quite useful. I love how I'm being really professional right now. But it's really, really useful because some people really do struggle with knowing how people are feeling or their emotions on their face. And I'm like, they really missed a trick. They should have put at least 4 faces on these, like one on the back. And then
I do love them. They are very cool. Yeah.
So lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been lovely.
Just to let everybody know that next week we've got fantastic Tanya Adkin coming on. Very, very, very knowledgeable about the EHCP process. So if you're in the UK, that refers to the education and healthcare plans that the process that you kind of have to go through to try and get your autistic young person the support they need in schools. So yes, that'll be really, really useful for a number of people. Lovely. So thank you everybody so much. I'm going to end the broadcast, but we can stay on here and just quickly chill.
Love it.
Bye everybody. See you next week.
Goodbye.
Yay.